Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bible reading plan. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 this morning, and Paul is talking about marriage. And the thing that I get from this chapter is that singleness has its benefits. I think in the church, we a lot of the time look at marriage as varsity and singleness as JV. It's like if you're not married, you're lesser than someone who is married. And if you're not married, then you get all the questions. When are you getting married? When are you getting married? When are you going to find that person? But not all people are called to be married. And Paul says here, it's probably better if we stay unmarried. And he says in verse 1, and now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because of temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. And then he says the husband should give the woman, give to his wife her rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, and the husband does not have authority over his own body. You give that up to serve the other one, to become one. And it says, do not deprive one another except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again. So he's saying, do not have sex if you or if you are fasting from it, or if it's a spiritual reason, but always go back to that. Do not deprive each other from that, because that is a key part of marriage. And if you abstain from it, you could fall into temptation elsewhere. And then he says, so Satan might not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Always come back together. And he's talking about, and then he goes on, and he says, I wish all of you were like me. I wish all of you were single like me, because when you have a wife or you have a husband, you're bound to, responsibilities outside of the mission field. He wants all people to be sharing the gospel as freely as they can. You see, Paul can travel anywhere he wants because he's not tied down to a family. And he's not saying that a family is bad or having a marriage is bad. He says that is a good thing. He's just saying, in the present time, especially in the present time he's in, but in this post-Christian world, post-Christ world where Paul is living, Christians are being persecuted. And he goes on to say, don't be, you might not want to get married because I'm trying to spare you pain. I'm trying to, if you get married, then it's going to be more responsibility. It's going to be more stress. It's going to be more fear from persecution, and they target families when they go out and persecute, so you're in more danger. So he's trying to spare them that pain as well. But then he says in verse 14, for the unbelieving man is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. So he's saying here, if you become a Christian and your wife is not a Christian, or your husband is not a Christian, then don't separate from them, because they could be saved by watching you. By watching your life, they could find Christ as well. It doesn't mean that they get a free ticket. It just means that they could be saved. Now, I think other translations say that better. And then he says in verse 17, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him, to which God has called them. And he's saying how you were saved, where you were when you were saved. Don't seek to change that. Don't seek to uproot that. I'm sure you've heard, bloom where you're planted, live as you were called. And I don't think you have to know exactly God's plan for your life to be obedient to him exactly where you are. And that's what he's saying. Be obedient where you are, for he who has called you, or called in the Lord as a bondservant, is a free man of the Lord. Likewise, he who was free when called is a bondservant of Christ. You were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants of men. And then he says in verse 26, I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. So he's saying, as you were saved, do not seek to get married because of this present distress that is over us right now, this persecution. So he says, I would spare you of that trouble in verse 28. 8, and he's seeking this whole time. He's saying, if you get a wife or husband, you're bound in earthly troubles because you're trying to please them. But he says it's no sin if you do get married, if you're engaged, and he says if you're in, there's all these sorts of scenarios he's throwing around. He says if you're engaged and you are struggling with temptation, with physical things, he says, get married. It's okay. I think now we worry about the wedding so much, but if you're struggling in your engagement, get married. Paul says it's no sin to just go ahead and get married. If you're burning with passion inside of you, if you're struggling with temptation between your significant other, you can get married. That's okay. It's either break up or get married at that point if you are sinning because of sexual immorality. But he says this is his goal in 35. This is why he says all this. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint on you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. And that's a big temptation. Maybe the biggest temptation that we have as married couples is putting our wife or our husband before God. It's so easy because they're there all the time and we want to please them, we want to serve them, but we a lot of the time put them above God, and that's not what we should do. That's not what we're commanded to do. And you'll find if you put God first, your marriage will be healthier. But if you chase after your spouse and not God, you're going to run into a wall. It's not going to be a fruitful marriage. You need God for that. And I often say you need to be running after God and look to the side and find someone running after you. And that's who you should marry. And in marriage, it's the same thing. As you run to God, you get closer together. You can't run just to each other. So he says in verse 38 in conclusion, so then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. And listen, guys, it is not required to get married. You don't have to get married. You can devote your life to God. You can say, I'm married to Christ. I am his church. I'm going to serve God with my entire being. God has called a lot of people to that. And I think we get mixed up thinking that, marriage is the only option. No, you can be single like Paul, like Jesus, and you can go out and live a life of ministry, serving God, storing treasures in heaven. And that is perfect. That is awesome. And Paul says that might be even better than marriage, because marriage distracts you a lot of time. But you can also live a life fully on mission in marriage with your partner. That is an option, and we see that in Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts. We see them married and living a life of mission. It's just a lot of the times it can get more difficult to do that. But I hope you're encouraged by this. Just live a life devoted to the Lord. That's what we get from this today, and I hope to see you tomorrow in the Bible reading plan. Bye.